The event was perfect. And Tonya Morgan knew it was perfect because she had made it perfect, personally, deliberately, and at the cost of 6 months of her life that she would never get back. The Meridian Tower Annual Tenant Appreciation Gala, 34th floor ballroom, downtown Chicago. 260 guests, executives, tenants, investors, plus the kind of people who get invited because somebody important likes having them in the room. The food was right. The lighting was right. The music was sitting exactly at the volume where people could still have real conversations without leaning into each other's ears. Tonya had done all of it, not supervised, not delegated, done. She knew the name of every single tenant in this building. Not just the company name, the actual human being who sat behind the desk and signed the lease. She knew that the CEO of the accounting firm on the 12th floor had a new granddaughter named after his late mother. She knew the law partners on the 20th floor had switched their coffee order 3 months ago, and she had made sure tonight's coffee station reflected that switch, because it was the kind of thing that made people feel seen without being able to explain why. She was moving through the room the way she always moved, easy, unhurried. Like she had nowhere more important to be, which was the trick, because she always had 17 things running simultaneously in the back of her mind, and none of them showed on her face. A younger colleague named Brianna fell into step beside her. "You know you could be running this entire company, right?" Tonya glanced at her sideways. "Baby, I already am. I just let Kevin think he is." Brianna laughed and disappeared back into the crowd. Tonya kept moving. Kevin Marsh was her boss, had been for 4 years. He was the kind of man who got promoted because he made senior management comfortable. Not because he was sharp, not because he was visionary, but because he laughed at the right moments and never made anyone feel threatened in a meeting. He had been at Meridian Property Group for 11 years. In that time, the most creative solution he had produced was switching the office printer paper to a cheaper brand. He got credit for it in a quarterly report. He did not like Tonya. He had not liked her since her 3rd week on the job, when she walked into a meeting he was running and, without being asked, identified a flaw in a vendor contract that saved the company $80,000. She hadn't been trying to embarrass him. She had just seen the problem and said so because that was what she did. Kevin had been watching her from across rooms ever since. Tonight, he was standing near the small stage at the far end of the ballroom. Tonya clocked him the way she clocked everything, peripherally, without making it obvious. He looked tense, which was unusual. Kevin usually looked either smug or unbothered. Tense was new. She filed it away. Then his hand reached for the microphone. The room settled almost as immediately. 260 people, responding to the signal of a man stepping toward a mic. Conversations dropped. People turned. Tonya stopped where she was. Kevin cleared his throat. "I need to bring something to everyone's attention." She felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air. Something wrong. During tonight's event, $14,000 in event reserve funds has gone missing from the management account. I've reviewed the transaction logs. I've reviewed the access records. He paused, and then he looked directly at her. And I think we all know who had sole access to those accounts. 260 people turned to look at Tonya Morgan at the exact same moment. She stood very still, not because she was afraid, not because she was guilty, but because in the half-second after Kevin's eyes landed on her, she did something she had not planned to do. She looked at the people around her, the people she had worked alongside for 4 years. The people she had solved problems for and remembered birthdays for, and shown up early and stayed late for. She looked for someone to say something. Brianna was 3 feet away. She looked down at her shoes. The senior property manager she had trained personally, he was looking at his phone. The tenant rep from the 18th floor, the one whose lease renewal Tonya had personally negotiated 6 months ago, he had turned slightly away, like he was very interested in something happening near the window. Nobody moved, nobody said a word. And that, not the accusation, not Kevin's voice on the microphone, not the 260 faces turned toward her, that was the thing that hit her. the silence where a defense should have been. She understood something in that moment that she would not forget for a long time. It doesn't matter how good you are. The moment someone with a microphone points at you, people decide what they believe before you open your mouth. Kevin was still talking. Something about accountability, something about fiduciary responsibility, something about the integrity of Meridian's reputation. His voice had the careful, practiced weight of a man who had rehearsed this. Tanya let him finish. Then she spoke. Kevin. Her voice came out calm, almost gentle. If I was going to steal, I definitely wouldn't choose an amount this embarrassing. The room broke into nervous laughter. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that happens when everyone is relieved that someone said something, because the tension was becoming unbearable. Kevin did not laugh and Tanya did not smile. She had been funny, yes, because she was always funny. It was one of her tools and one of her genuine qualities, and she could not always separate the two. But her eyes were doing something completely different from her mouth. Her eyes were already working. Hey besties, if this kind of story is what you came here for, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss one. Drop in the comments. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who knew exactly what they were doing? She went home that night and did not cry. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a glass of water she didn't drink, and she pulled every transaction record she had personally saved to her encrypted drive over the last 4 years. Because Tanya Morgan had a habit that her colleagues found faintly obsessive and that she had never once apologized for, she kept copies of everything. Not because she was paranoid. Because she understood buildings, and she understood that buildings were ultimately just systems. And systems broke down, and when they broke down, you needed documentation. She started building a timeline: date, time, access ID, amount, vendor. She had been doing this for 40 minutes when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. Miss, a woman's voice. Formal, this is HR. We're calling to inform you that effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into the missing funds. You'll need to surrender your building access card tomorrow morning. Tanya was quiet for a moment. Who authorized the investigation? That came from senior management. Which senior manager? A pause. I'm not able to disclose that information at this. I'll need the full authorization chain in writing, Tanya said. By end of business tomorrow. She hung up. Then she went back to her timeline. Most people Tanya's position would have panicked. They would have called someone, a friend, a family member, a lawyer, and spent the next 3 hours going over everything that had just happened, replaying the moment at the microphone, cataloging every face that had looked away, trying to figure out what to do next. Tanya did none of that. She opened a second tab on her laptop and started searching. Not her own records this time. Vendor records. Specifically a company called Halston Mechanical Services, which had appeared on 3 separate invoices she'd reviewed in the past 2 months during a routine budget reconciliation. She hadn't flagged it then because the amounts were not unusual and the paperwork looked clean. But something about the name had stayed in the back of her mind. The way a sound you can't quite place stays in your ear until you figure out what it was. She searched the Illinois Business Registry. Halston Mechanical Services, registered 3 years ago. Current status, active, registered address, a UPS store in Schaumburg. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she went back to the invoice records and pulled every transaction associated with Halston Mechanical Services for the past 24 months. $780,000 for HVAC maintenance services on a building that Tanya managed. A building where she had personally handled every single HVAC issue for 3 of those years. A building where she knew every contractor, every service record, every system failure and repair date. She had never once spoken to anyone from Halston Mechanical Services. Not once. She sat back in her chair. The water glass was still untouched beside her laptop. The apartment was quiet. Chicago outside the window, doing what Chicago does at midnight, alive and indifferent. Kevin, she said out loud to no one. You stupid greedy little man. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to a name she hadn't called in 8 months. Cheryl Odom, 52 years old. Former IRS forensic accountant, now private. Tanya had gone to DePaul with Cheryl's younger sister, and Cheryl owed her a favor. The real kind, not the polite kind, not the let's do lunch kind. The kind where you pick up on the first ring at midnight. Cheryl, I need you to run a forensic trace on a company called Halston Mechanical Services and cross-reference every invoice against Meridian Tower's operational accounts for the last 30 months. A pause. Tanya, I know what time it is. Are you in trouble? Someone is. I'm trying to figure out exactly who. She paused. Can you start tonight? Another pause, shorter this time. Send me what you have. Already sending. She hung up and forwarded the files before the call had been over for 30 seconds. Then she went to bed. Not because she was calm, because she understood that what was coming would require her to be sharp, and being sharp required sleep, and she was not going to let Kevin Marsh take her sleep from her on top of everything else. She was awake by 5:30. By 6 a.m., she was back at her kitchen table with coffee and her personal laptop. And she was doing something that most people on administrative leave would not think to do. She was making a list of every tenant in Meridian Tower, their direct contact numbers, and the last conversation she'd had with each of them. She did this not because she had a plan yet. She did it because she knew herself, and she knew that when the plan came, she would need to move quickly, and she wanted the list ready. At 9:47 a.m., Cheryl called back. Her voice was different from the night before. Not alarmed. Cheryl was not an alarmable person, but careful. The voice of someone who has found something and is choosing her words. Tonya, there isn't one shell company. There are 14. The kitchen went very quiet. Say that again. 14 separate shell companies, all routing payments through different accounts, all with paperwork clean enough to survive a standard audit. And the total exposure, a pause. Tonya, this is over $2 million. She did not speak for a moment. How long? The earliest transaction I can trace goes back 26 months. But the structure of this, the way it was built, someone laid the groundwork before the first dollar moved. This took planning, real planning. Tanya thought about Raymond Cole, 57 years old, senior financial controller, 19 years at Meridian. The man who had quiet access to every financial door in the building. The man who was so unremarkable, so thoroughly beige in his presence, that nobody ever looked at him too long or thought too hard about what he might be doing. 19 years. Can you build a complete evidence package, Tanya asked. Something that holds up. Give me 72 hours, you have 48. She hung up. Then she picked up her phone again. She looked at the contact she had been avoiding since last night. Her husband, Song Jae-sub. She pressed call. He picked up on the first ring, Tanya, just her name. And in those 2 syllables was everything. The worry he'd been sitting with since last night, the restraint it had cost him to not call her first. The particular way he said her name that she had never once been able to describe to anyone, but that she had understood from the very first time she heard it. Jae-sub, she said. How long have you known? He didn't ask what she meant. He never played that game. 4 months, he said. I had the broad picture, not the full evidence. You were going to move without telling me. He was quiet for exactly 1 second. Yes, Jae-sub, and I was wrong, he said. Steady, not defensive, just honest. She let that sit. I'm going to handle this, she said. I need you to do nothing for 48 hours. Can you do that? The pause he gave her then was the longest of the conversation. 48 hours, he said. Thank you. She hung up. And for the first time since Kevin Marsh picked up that microphone, she let herself feel the full weight of the last 18 hours. Every face that looked away, Brianna's shoes, the silence where someone should have spoken. She sat with that, then went back to work. Understand why Song Jae-sub knew about the fraud 4 months before his wife did. You need to understand who Song Jae-sub is. He was not born into money. People who meet him now, in boardrooms, at private dinners, in the kind of rooms where the furniture alone costs more than most people's annual salary. They assume the wealth is generational. Old Korean money, something inherited, something cushioned. It wasn't. J-Sub grew up in Incheon. His father ran a small hardware store. His mother taught elementary school. They were not poor, but they were careful. The way people are careful when they know exactly how thin the margin is between stable and not. He watched his father work 6 days a week for 20 years and still spend Sunday nights sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator and a look on his face that he tried to hide from his children. J-Sub decided at 16 that he was going to make a lot of money, not just earn it, understand it. The way it moved, the way it hid, the way it accumulated quietly in the hands of people who knew which doors to open and when. He studied economics at Yonsei, then finance in London. Then, he spent 4 years inside a private equity firm in Hong Kong, watching how capital moved across borders in ways that the people whose money it was never fully understood. He learned to read financial structures the way some people read faces, instinctively, immediately, seeing the shape of what was actually happening underneath the surface of what was presented. He started JSK Capital Holdings at 31 with 1 partner and 1 investor. By 43, JSK Capital Holdings had a portfolio across 7 countries. Meridian Tower in Chicago was one of 3 commercial properties JSK owned in the United States, held through a subsidiary called Lakeshore Meridian LLC. Most people inside Meridian Property Group, the management company that ran the building on behalf of ownership, had never heard of Lakeshore Meridian LLC. They knew they had an ownership entity. They did not know who the entity was. That was by design. Partly, it was good business. J-Sub had learned early that the most effective ownership was quiet ownership. You let good management run the operations and you stayed invisible until you needed not to be. But partly it was Tonya. She had come to him with the idea 3 years ago, the night before she started at Meridian. They had been married for less than 6 months. She was sitting at the kitchen table in their Lincoln Park house, going through her notes for her first day, and she looked up at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Something close to nervous, though she would never use that word. "Nobody can know," she said. He sat down across from her. "I know. I mean it, J-Sub. Not your assistant. Not Minho. Nobody at Meridian. Nobody connected to Meridian. I understand. Because the moment they find out everything I do there belongs to you. Every problem I solve, every relationship I build, every result I produce, it all gets reduced to the boss's wife doing the boss's wife things." She looked at him directly. "I built my career with my own hands. I am not going to let that get taken from me." He looked at her for a long moment. And he felt, sitting across from her at that kitchen table, what he had felt the first time he met her. The specific clarifying experience of being in the presence of someone who is exactly who they say they are. "Okay," he said. "Okay, whatever you need, Tonya, it's your career. I'm not going to touch it." She looked at him like she was checking for the catch. There was no catch. What he did not tell her that night, what he kept to himself because he thought it would make her feel managed rather than loved, was that he had already quietly asked Minho to keep a general awareness of the management situation at Meridian. Not surveillance, not intervention, just awareness. Because J-Sub understood risk, and the risk of his wife walking into a building he owned without anyone knowing the connection was a risk he was not able to sit with completely blind. Minho was 38. Former military intelligence. Now J-Sub's head of security and, more accurately, the person who knew where every body was buried across all of JSK's operations, figuratively speaking. He was methodical, discreet, and had a gift for noticing things that were not quite right. 4 months ago, Minho noticed something was not quite right at Meridian Tower. He brought it to J-Sub, an irregular pattern in the operational accounts. Small transfers, inflated vendor invoices, maintenance contractors who appeared on paper but not in any service record. He didn't have the full picture yet. He was still building the case. J-Sub had told him to keep building. And while Minho was building, Tonya had walked into a vendor meeting, noticed something odd in a contract addendum, and asked for a copy of the original. That request had been intercepted by Raymond Cole, and Cole had told Kevin Marsh. And Kevin Marsh had made his move before they were ready, before J-Sub and Minho had the full evidence chain, before they could do anything clean and decisive. Kevin had moved first because he was scared. And scared people, J-Sub had learned over 20 years of watching them, were often more dangerous than calculated ones. J-Sub was in his office on the 41st floor of a building across the city when Minho's text came through during a board meeting. They moved against her. He read it once, set the phone face down on the table, waited exactly 90 seconds, long enough to not appear panicked, short enough to not appear indifferent. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to step out," he called Minho from the corridor. "How bad?" "Public accusation. Administrative leave. Access revoked." A pause. "She hasn't called you." "She won't." J-Sub turned toward the window. Chicago below him, gray and cold. "Pull everything we have on Cole and Marsh, everything, tonight, already compiled." "What do you want to do?" And here was the moment. Here was where every instinct he had, every protective, reactive, powerful instinct built across 4 months of watching this situation develop, told him to move, to call his lawyers, to make one phone call that would have Kevin Marsh clearing his desk by morning. He didn't. "Nothing," he said. "Not yet." "She said 48 hours?" "She hasn't called me yet. When she does, she'll ask for 48 hours, and I'm going to give them to her." Minho was quiet for a moment. "And if she doesn't call?" J-Sub looked at Chicago through the glass. "She'll call," he said. He was right. She called the next morning. What he didn't tell her on that call, what he had done quietly, carefully, within the window before she called, was that he had already made one move. Not a move that touched her case, not a move that gave anything away. He had called the FBI's Chicago field office, Financial Crimes Division. He had a contact there, a professional relationship built over years of legitimate cross-border finance operations, the kind of relationship that serious business people in serious industries develop and rarely advertise. He had not given them Tanya's name. He had not given them the evidence package. He had simply flagged Meridian Tower as a situation worth watching and indicated that a whistleblower scenario was developing that would produce a full evidence package through official channels within 48 hours. He gave the 48 hours to Tanya. Cheryl called at 11:47 p.m. with a voice that Tanya had never heard from her before. Not alarmed. Cheryl Odom did not do alarmed, but careful. The particular careful of a woman who has spent 22 years in forensic accounting and knows what it means when the numbers stop adding up in a normal way and start adding up in a deliberate way. 14 shell companies, she said again, like she was still processing it herself. All structured to survive standard audits, all with paperwork clean enough that you'd need to know what you were looking for before you could see it. "And you saw it. I saw it." And Tanya, the 5-year contract. "What 5-year contract?" A pause. "That's what I'm getting to. Among the documents you sent me, there's a contract addendum dated 2 weeks ago, authorizing a company called Hulston Mechanical Services as the exclusive HVAC vendor for Meridian Tower. 5-year term, non-cancelable, total contract value of $4.2 million. Tanya went still. "That contract hasn't been processed yet," Cheryl continued. "It's in the pipeline, but once it gets signed off through the normal approval channels, it's locked in, and the company receiving $4.2 million over 5 years is a UPS store in Schaumburg." The room felt different suddenly, smaller. "They needed me gone before that contract reached approval," Tanya said slowly, "because I would have seen it. You would have seen it in 20 minutes. And I would have pulled the thread." She stood up from her desk, started moving the way she always moved when her mind was running fast. Not pacing, just slow, deliberate steps that gave her body something to do while her brain worked. The 14 shell companies, the 2.3 million, all of it all unravels the moment someone looks at that contract and asks the right question. Yes, so Kevin stages the theft, gets me publicly accused, gets my access revoked. I look like a disgruntled employee making noise. Anything I say from that point forward sounds like deflection. "It's actually a good plan," Cheryl said. She didn't sound admiring. She sounded like someone acknowledging an unpleasant truth. It's a good plan, Tanya agreed. But they missed something. What? They got my work access card. They didn't get 4 years of personal documentation. She stopped moving. Cheryl, I need the full evidence package. Everything. I need it solid enough to go federal. Give me 72. Tanya, Cheryl. A long exhale. Fine. 48. Send it directly to my attorney when it's done. Not to me. To her. She hung up and stood in the middle of her home office for a moment. Then she texted an unknown number back, the number that had sent her the cryptic message earlier that evening. The one that told her about the contract addendum, the one that said Raymond Cole had intercepted the original documents before they reached her. She had been thinking about that text since she received it. Only a handful of people knew she'd requested that contract from the vendor. The vendor herself, Tanya, and the administrative coordinator who had processed the request, Paulette Sims, 44 years old, Kevin Marsh's personal assistant for 6 years. Efficient, quiet, kept to herself. Tanya had always filed her under Kevin's orbit, handle with care. But Paulette had children. She had mentioned them exactly once in a conversation Tanya had not initiated. 3 kids. Tanya remembered because Tanya always remembered. She called Paulette directly. You texted me, Tanya said. A long pause, long enough that Tanya could hear Paulette deciding. Yes, Paulette finally said. I did. How long have you known? Another pause, shorter. Like she'd already made the harder decision and this one was easier. 8 months. 8 months. Tanya kept her voice even. And you watched them set me up. I needed this job, Tanya. I have 3 kids and I needed. Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. I know that doesn't. I know. Where is the contract with the second addendum? Raymond keeps everything physical. Locked file cabinet in his office. But I know where the spare key is. Tanya thought fast. She was on administrative leave. Her building access card was deactivated. Standard entry was out. Can you get me 1 hour of building access tonight? Service entrance, silence. You'd have to come in after midnight, Paulette said. Security rotation changes at 11:30. There's a window. I know the window. She did. She had mapped the security rotation as part of a building safety audit 18 months ago. She'd kept the notes. She kept all the notes. Paulette, don't touch anything in that office before I get there. And don't tell anyone. I won't. I mean anyone. I understand. One more thing. Tanya pulled a small notepad from her desk drawer and wrote a number from memory. There's a lawyer named Patricia Kwan. You call her tomorrow morning, first thing. You tell her everything. She's very good and she'll tell you exactly what you need to do. Is she expensive? I'll cover the retainer. Don't worry about that. She tore the page from the notepad. You did the right thing tonight, Paulette. Whatever happened before tonight, you did the right thing. She hung up, got dressed, all black, practical. Grabbed her personal override code. A 6-digit sequence she had memorized 2 years ago after a late-night HVAC emergency showed her that the building's management team had no backup physical access protocol. She had built one herself, documented it, and filed it. She had also kept a copy, because she kept everything. At 12:15 a.m., she was at the service entrance on the east side of Meridian Tower. Paulette was waiting. They moved fast and silent through the building, up the service stairs to the management floor. Raymond's office, the file cabinet, the spare key exactly where Paulette said it would be. Tanya opened the drawer and found the contract in under 2 minutes. She read every page of the second addendum under the light of her phone. The full Halston Mechanical Services Agreement, the 5-year exclusive clause, the $4.2 million authorization. She photographed every page, sent them to Cheryl, sent them to her own encrypted cloud backup. Then she looked at Paulette, who was standing near the door, with her arms crossed over her chest, like she was holding herself together. You've been carrying this for 8 months, Tanya said. Yes, that's a heavy thing to carry alone. Paulette looked at her. How are you so calm right now? Tanya thought about it honestly. Because I'm angry, she said. And when I'm angry, I go quiet. It's a personality flaw my husband finds both attractive and deeply inconvenient. Paulette almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. They walked out the same way they came in. The security camera on that corridor had a 7-minute rotation loop. Tanya had clocked it 18 months ago during a routine safety assessment. She knew the building better than anyone. She always had. Cheryl called at 7 a.m. the next morning, 90 minutes before the 48-hour deadline. Tanya was already awake. She had slept 4 hours, which was enough. She answered on the second ring. "It's done," Cheryl said. "Full package. Wire fraud, embezzlement, falsification of corporate records, conspiracy. Federal level, no question. I'm sending it to your attorney now." "Good. There's something else?" The way she said it made Tanya put down her coffee. "Raymond Cole's offshore account, the one that received the real payout from the Halston network, it routes through a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands." A pause. "Tanya, that holding company is connected to a man named Arthur Brenn." She knew the name immediately. Arthur Brenn, 63 years old. Old Chicago real estate money. The kind of money that gets invited to sit on boards, not because it's particularly sharp, but because it's comfortable and connected, and has been around long enough that nobody questions its presence. He had been on Meridian Property Group's board of directors for 9 years. He had signed off on Kevin Marsh's last 3 performance reviews. "Arthur Brenn," Tanya said. "Yes, he's on the board, I know." She stood up from her kitchen table and walked to the window. The city outside was doing its morning thing. Traffic building, the sky that particular early morning gray that Chicago does before the sun commits to showing up. "Kevin and Raymond aren't running this," she said. "Not a question. No. Kevin and Raymond are operators. Brenn is the architect. I found similar financial structures on 2 other commercial properties in the Chicago metro, both with management companies that have board-level connections to Brenn. Meridian was the newest. He needed it clean for at least 12 months before the Halston contract went through, which is why he needed me gone," Tanya finished. "He needed me gone before I saw the contract. Kevin was just the person closest to me with enough motive to make it happen." "That's my read," Tanya thought about Kevin Marsh. His insecurity, his small daily cruelties, his need to be the most important person in rooms that he had not built. She thought about the night of the gala, his voice on that microphone, the practiced weight of it. He had been used. Not entirely. He had been willing, clearly. He had participated fully. But he had also been a tool in someone else's hand, pointed in a direction that was useful to someone far above him. That did not make her feel sorry for Kevin Marsh, but it made the picture complete. "Send everything to Patricia Kwan," she said. "She'll take it to the FBI directly, already going." She hung up and sat back down. Then she called G-Sub. He picked up before the first ring had finished. "It goes higher than Kevin," she said. "I know." She paused. "How much do you know? More than I told you." He said it quietly, evenly. Not a confession exactly. More like a reckoning with himself happening in real time. "Arthur Brenn has been on our radar for 3 months. Minho traced the offshore structure back to him 6 weeks ago." The kitchen was very quiet. Six weeks ago," she said. "Yes, and you didn't tell me." No, she thought about that, about what it cost him not to tell her. About the particular discipline of a man who understood power and restraint better than almost anyone she had ever met. Sitting on information like that for 6 weeks, because he had promised her he would let her do her own work. "You were protecting me," she said. "I was respecting what you asked for," he said. "There's a difference, and I am still figuring out where the line is." She exhaled. "My attorney is taking the full package to the FBI today." "Good, G-Sub," she hesitated. "When did you call them?" A pause. "Measured. Before your 48 hours started." She absorbed that. "You didn't give them anything." "I told them a whistleblower situation was developing, and that a full evidence package would come through official channels within 48 hours. I did not give them your name. I did not give them any evidence. I just made sure the desk was cleared when your attorney walked up to it." She sat with that for a long moment. He had given her the 48 hours in full. He had honored every word of what she asked. And before she asked, he had done the one thing that would make sure her work actually landed. Not by taking over, not by stepping in front of her, but by making sure the door she was walking toward was already unlocked. "That's not nothing," she said. "I know, but it's also not what I asked you not to do." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Another silence, different from the ones before it, less loaded. "You're impossible," she finally said. He said nothing. "You know where the line is," she said, and she heard, even as she said it, that she sounded surprised, not at him, at herself. Surprised that after 3 years she was still discovering the ways in which he managed to be exactly who he said he was. "I try to," he said. "I'll call you after I speak with Patricia." She hung up, took a breath, called her attorney. Patricia Kwan was 50 years old, meticulous and entirely unmoved by pressure, the product of 20 years in federal litigation that had carved away every unnecessary thing and left only precision. She had the full evidence package from Cheryl in her inbox before Tanya finished explaining what it contained. "Arthur Bren," Patricia said. "Just the name, the same way you'd say it if you already had a file open. You know him. He's been adjacent to 2 other situations I'm aware of. Nothing ever stuck because nobody ever had the full documentation." A pause. "This is the full documentation." "Yes. I'll call the FBI this morning." "There may already be a contact waiting," Tanya said carefully. "A beat. Your husband, it wasn't a question." Patricia Kwan was not a woman who asked questions she already knew the answers to. "He opened a door," Tanya said. "I walked through it myself." "Understood." Another pause, shorter. "Tanya, this was exceptional work." "I know," Tanya said. She wasn't being arrogant. She was being honest. She had done exceptional work. She had done it alone, under pressure, while publicly accused of a crime she did not commit, in a building where every person she had given 4 years of herself to had looked at their shoes when she needed them. She had done it anyway, because that was who she was. It happened on a Thursday, 14 days after the gala. Kevin Marsh was at his desk in the Meridian Tower Management Office at 8:40 a.m. when 2 FBI agents and a representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office walked through the door. He looked up from his computer. He looked at the badges. He looked at the faces. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He didn't do any of the things that people who have not thought through the consequences of their actions sometimes do when the consequences arrive. He just went very still. Later, people who were in the office that morning would say that Kevin Marsh looked, in that moment, like a man who had always known this was coming and had simply been waiting to find out which morning it would choose. Raymond Cole was at his home in Evanston. He was eating breakfast, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice, the kind of orderly, precise morning routine of a man who had spent 19 years convincing himself that careful living and careful theft were compatible. The agents knocked at 8:52. He opened the door in a bathrobe. He looked at them for a long moment. "I'd like to call my attorney," he said. "Of course," one of the agents said. Arthur Bren was in the private dining room of his River North Club. It was his Thursday tradition. The same table, the same order, the same 2 colleagues, who were not colleagues so much as they were the kind of men Arthur Bren had always surrounded himself with, loyal, quiet, and not too curious. He was on his second coffee when 4 people walked into the dining room. 2 federal agents, Patricia Kwan and a man from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, who had been building a parallel case on Arthur Bren for 11 months, and was having a very good Thursday morning. Arthur Bren looked at Patricia Kwan first, because Arthur Bren was the kind of man who understood immediately when a situation had been orchestrated, and he understood that whatever this was, whatever had come together to produce this moment, it had been organized by someone who knew what they were doing. "Arthur Bren," one of the agents said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement." He put his coffee cup down, carefully, like he was going to pick it back up when this was over. He wasn't going to pick it back up. By noon, the news had broken. Federal charges against 3 individuals connected to Meridian Tower's management structure. Wire fraud, embezzlement. A multi-million-dollar scheme spanning multiple commercial properties in the Chicago area. The kind of story that makes the business pages and the local news simultaneously, because it has enough detail to be interesting and enough money to be scandalous. By 12:15, Tanya's phone was ringing, not her personal phone, her professional one, the one she had not surrendered because it was hers, not Meridian's, and she paid the bill herself. She looked at the number. An area code she recognized, but a number she didn't. She answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Gerald Fitch, 61 years old, CEO of the parent company that owned Meridian Property Group. She had never spoken to him directly. Kevin Marsh had spent 4 years making sure she never spoke to him directly. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, "I want to start by offering you a formal apology on behalf of this organization for what happened at the gala and in the days that followed. What was done to you was wrong, professionally and personally wrong, and we should have." "Fitch," she said, "I appreciate that, but I'd like it in writing." A pause. "Of course. I'd also like a written reinstatement offer and the terms of a full internal review of the management structure. By end of business Friday." "Absolutely, Miss. More, I also wanted to let you know that JSK Capital Holdings, the ownership entity for Meridian Tower, has been in contact with us and would like to schedule a conversation about the building's management going forward." Tanya was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she made a decision. Not a snap decision. It had been building for 4 years, and maybe longer. Maybe since that kitchen table conversation 3 years ago, when she told her husband that nobody could know. 4 years of proving herself in a building he owned, to people who had no idea, because she had needed to prove it to herself first. And she had needed to know, really know, in the way you only know things you've earned, that she was capable of this without his name attached to her work. She knew now. "Mr. Fitch," she said, "I'm aware of JSK Capital Holdings. I see. Are you familiar with Song Jae-sub personally, or?" "Song Jae-sub is my husband," she said. "He has been for 3 years." The silence on the other end of the phone was long enough to be genuinely funny. She might have enjoyed it more if she weren't simultaneously very tired. "Miss Morgan, I don't. We kept it private for professional reasons," she said. "Those reasons no longer apply because I've demonstrated thoroughly that I can do my job without anyone's help." She let that land. "I'll expect the written materials by Friday. Thank you for calling." She hung up, turned around. Jae-sub was standing in the doorway of her home office. He had been there long enough to have heard all of it. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I was going to tell them eventually," she said. "Sure you were." She picked up a pen cap from her desk and threw it at him. He caught it without blinking. Of course he caught it. The thing about Jae-sub that people who didn't know him always got wrong, and people who knew him professionally almost always got wrong, was that they assumed his quietness was distance. They saw a controlled man who chose words carefully and moved through rooms without making noise, and they decided this meant he was cold. He was not cold, he was precise. Those are completely different things. Tanya had figured that about him in the first 3 months of knowing him, back when they were not yet together, and she still hadn't decided if she wanted to be, back when she was watching him the way she watched all situations that she didn't fully understand yet. Carefully, from a slight distance, cataloging evidence. They had met at a commercial real estate conference in downtown Chicago. She had been there representing Meridian's management team. He had been there as an investor, though not loudly. Jae-sub at professional events had the particular quality of a person who does not need to be the loudest or the most visible in the room, because he has already done whatever he needed to do before he walked in. She had noticed him noticing her, not in the usual way, not the way men at conferences sometimes noticed her, which was a particular kind of noticing that she had developed very efficient methods for redirecting. He was noticing her the way she noticed things, attentively, without performing the attention. She walked over to him, not because she planned to, because it was interesting, and Tanya Morgan had never once backed away from something interesting in her life. "You've been watching me present for 20 minutes, she said, "without a drink in your hand, which means you're actually paying attention and not just looking busy." He looked at her. Your analysis of the building's tenant retention strategy was the first accurate one I've heard at this conference. It was the only accurate one. The man before me was quoting numbers from a 2019 study. I noticed. What did you notice about mine? He told her, in specific detail, not flattery analysis. He had seen exactly what she'd done, and he understood why it worked, and he could articulate it clearly. She had been unexpectedly delighted. They talked for 2 hours. They had dinner 3 days later. 6 months after that, they were married. Quickly, privately, with a small gathering of people who mattered to them, in a place that was theirs and nobody else's business. She had known fast, which was unlike her. But she had spent enough time cataloging evidence to recognize when the evidence was overwhelming. He was precisely who he said he was. He did not try to make her smaller. He did not try to manage her. He did not, and this was the rarest thing, the thing she had almost stopped expecting to find. He did not feel threatened by the size of her. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of their particular, unconventional, carefully negotiated arrangement. 3 years of him honoring what she asked for, even when it cost him something to do it. She thought about all of this on the Thursday evening after the arrests, sitting across from him at their kitchen table, with takeout containers between them and the city, doing its evening thing outside the window. "You're thinking very loudly," he said. "I think loudly when I'm processing." "What are you processing?" She looked at him. "That I was right to do it the way I did it. You were. And that it was also harder than it needed to be. Because I was so determined to prove I didn't need help that I sometimes made things harder than they had to be." He waited. He was very good at waiting. "You knew about Bren for 6 weeks, she said. And you said nothing because I asked you not to interfere. But if you'd told me 6 weeks ago, I would have had more time. I might have gotten ahead of Kevin's move." "Yes," he said. "That's true. So we both made it harder." "We did." She picked up her chopsticks, put them back down. "I'm not saying I would change what I did. I needed to do it the way I did it. I needed to prove it to myself, not to them. But I can admit that there's a difference between independence and isolation." J-Sub was quiet for a moment. Then, "I should have found a way to tell you, not to interfere, just to tell you." He looked at her directly. "I was so careful about the line that I ended up on the wrong side of it in a different way. Yes, I won't do that again." She looked at him. He meant it. He always meant it, that was the thing. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean. "Good," she said. She picked up her chopsticks again. They ate. Outside, Chicago was moving into night, the lake somewhere in the dark beyond the buildings. The lights of the city doing what they always did, which was make the darkness beside them look like a design choice rather than an absence. "Gerald Fitch called me back this afternoon," she said. "Written apology is coming Friday. Reinstatement offer too." "I know. He called me as well. What did you say?" "I told him that Ms. Morgan would be the appropriate person to negotiate the terms of her own reinstatement and that he should direct all further communication to her." She stopped eating and looked at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She shook her head slightly. You always do that." "Do what?" "Give it back to me." She paused. "Every time someone tries to route around me to you, you route them back." He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood. "It's your building, Tanya. It has been from the beginning." She was quiet for a moment. "It's our building," she said. "I'm just the one who runs it." He did smile then, real and unhurried. The smile she had first seen at a conference table 4 years ago, when she walked up to a stranger who was paying actual attention, and decided to find out why. "You run it very well," he said. "I know," she said, and she smiled back. And it was the first time since the night of the gala that her eyes and her mouth were doing the same thing at the same time. 3 weeks after the gala, Tanya walked back into Meridian Tower, not through the service entrance, not at midnight, not in all black with a phone flashlight and a 6-digit override code, through the front door, 7:15 a.m., the exact same time she had always arrived. Wearing a deep rust-colored blazer and the calm, unhurried energy of someone who has never once needed a grand entrance, because she has always simply arrived and let the room adjust. the security guard at the front desk, the one who had given her only a nod the morning after the gala, stood up when she came through the door. "Monsieur Morgan." He extended his hand. "Welcome back." She shook it. "Good morning, James." She knew his name. She had always known his name. She took the elevator to the management floor and walked to her office. Someone had put fresh flowers on her desk. She didn't know who. She sat down, opened her laptop, and started working. By 8 a.m. she had returned 7 emails. By 9 a.m. she had spoken with 4 tenants who had called directly when they heard she was back. By noon, she had drafted a full internal review proposal for the management structure that identified 3 systemic vulnerabilities in the oversight process that had allowed Kevin and Raymond to operate for 26 months without triggering an internal audit flag. She sent the proposal to Gerald Fitch with a cover note that was 3 sentences long and contained no unnecessary words. Gerald Fitch responded in 20 minutes. "This is exactly what we needed. Can we discuss a VP-level role?" She wrote back. "We can discuss it. I have conditions." She always had conditions. The conditions were always reasonable, and they always in the end got met because Tanya Morgan's conditions were never about ego. They were about function. She knew what made things work, and she asked for it, and she delivered on it, and the results were always the same. The building ran better when she was running it. Everyone knew it. It just took some people 4 years and a federal investigation to say it out loud. Brianna came to her office that afternoon. She stood in the doorway for a moment before Tanya looked up. When Tanya did look up, she saw on Brianna's face what she had expected to see, the particular discomfort of someone who knows they owe an apology and hasn't yet figured out how to begin it. Tanya waited. "I should have said something," Brianna said, "that night at the gala. When Kevin... I should have said something, and I didn't, and I don't have a good reason for that. I just..." She stopped. "I froze!" Tanya looked at her for a long moment, not unkindly. "But honestly, you froze," she said. "Yes. And then you looked at your shoes." Brianna flinched. "Yes, Brianna." Tanya set her pen down. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't hurt. It did. You were 3 feet away from me, and I looked at you, and you looked down. And that is one of the things from that night that I will not forget for a long time." Brianna's eyes were glassy. She didn't look away. "But I also understand that fear is real, and that it makes people do things they wouldn't do otherwise. Kevin had real power in that room. Looking away was the safe choice, and I understand why people make safe choices. That doesn't make it right." "No," Tanya agreed. "It doesn't. But understanding something and forgiving it aren't the same thing as excusing it. I can do both without excusing it." Brianna was quiet for a moment. Are you? "We're fine, Brianna." She said it simply, not warmly, not coldly, honestly. "But I want you to remember that moment. Not to punish yourself with it. I mean genuinely remember it. Because moments like that are how you find out who you want to be. And next time..." "There won't be a next time." "Good," Tanya said. "Now close my door on your way out. I have a VP negotiation to prepare for." Brianna almost smiled, almost. She closed the door. That evening, Tanya and J-Sub went up to the rooftop of Meridian Tower. She had a key. She had always had a key. She had built the rooftop access protocol 2 years ago after a safety inspection identified gaps in the emergency exit procedures. She had the key because she was the one who had identified the gap, proposed the solution, implemented it, and documented it. She had the key because she always had the key. They stood at the north edge, looking out over Chicago. The lake was visible tonight, dark and vast, the skyline reflected in pieces on the surface. The city below them, doing its eternal, indifferent, magnificent thing. She had spent a lot of her life in this city. She knew it the way you know a person you've loved for a long time. Not perfectly, not completely, but in the specific, detailed way that comes from paying attention across years. "You never called me," J-Sub said, "that first night. After the gala. I know. You weren't going to. I wasn't sure." She looked out at the water. "Part of me wasn't sure if calling you would mean I'd failed." He was quiet for a moment. "Failed what?" "Myself." She paused. The version I'd planned in my head, where I handled everything alone and didn't need anyone and proved the whole point. And now Now I think the whole point was never about not needing anyone. She turned to look at him. I needed Cheryl. I needed Paulette. I even needed the door you opened, even if I wanted to pretend I didn't. You used every resource you actually had, he said. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. I know that now. She looked back at the city. I think I was confusing independence with isolation. I do that sometimes. Sometimes, he agreed, carefully, not piling on. The difference, she said slowly, working it out as she said it, is that independence means you can do it yourself. Isolation means you refuse to let anyone stand beside you while you do. She paused. I want the first one. I don't want the second one. He didn't respond immediately. He just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, looking at Chicago then. So what now? She didn't answer right away. She let the question sit in the air between them, over the city, over the building beneath their feet, that had always been hers in the ways that actually mattered. Now, she said, they put my name on the door, he laughed, low, real, unhurried. The laugh she had first heard at a dinner table 4 years ago, and had spent every year since then finding reasons to bring out of him. It should have been there from the beginning, he said. It should have. She looked at him sideways, and for the first time since his microphone had turned a room against her, her eyes and her face were doing exactly the same thing, warm and sharp and completely, entirely herself. But I'm glad I put it there myself. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They stood there for a while. 2 people in a city they had both chosen, in a life they had built together and separately and somehow both at once.